May I ask you for a big round of applause, Anne-Laure de Chammard. Anne-Laure, Bruno, in recent years, as we have heard, Europe's role on the global stage has been undergoing a rather profound transformation, to put it mildly. And we see alliances shifting almost on a daily basis. We see Europe's position as a central player being questioned in international geopolitics, one might say severely challenged even. How can Europe turn geopolitical challenges into its advantages within the next 1 or 2 years?
Well, first of all, we have to once again acknowledge that we are not a key geopolitical player anymore. And when I make the comparison between where we are and when we were 20 years before, that's really striking. 20 years before, you had leaders like Jacques Chirac or Tony Blair in the UK, playing at the forefront of the international stage. Let's be clear, whether on the Middle East or on Ukraine, and on all geopolitical topics, it's not the case anymore. If we want to be back, there are some conditions to be met. First of all, we need to be economically successful. Without a strong economy, you don't have a strong voice. With an average level of growth of around 1%, when it is more than 5% in China and 2 to 3% in the US, you don't have your place around the table. Second, you must be united. And since it will be impossible to get the unity among the 27 member states, my proposal is to shift from the unanimity rule to the qualified majority rule on international questions. And third, last point, we need to have a strategic approach of the two key continents for us, I mean the US and China. What is the kind of relationship we want to build for China? What is the kind of relationship we want to build with the Chinese government and the Chinese economy? You will get a different response in every European capital. This is not possible anymore.
Strength, and that goes to both of you, strength can result from dependency and strength can result from independence. And let's focus a little bit on the news these days to get it more precise to what we're talking about. And one of the major news, at least in Germany, and I think that also applies for the French automotive industry, for example, is the supply chain problem, is independence from certain players and actors such as China and others. Can reduce, and this question goes to you, Anne-Laure, can Europe reduce its dependencies while at the same time formulating these visions? That seems to be a difficult thing to handle both at the same time. What's your take on that?
So I wouldn't say it's actually problematic. On the contrary, I think that by investing in our own supply chain, in our own infrastructure, we're actually going to solve also the growth problem that we're talking about. If we look at what was Europe a few decades ago, we were relying on a huge export market, China. We were relying on very cheap gas. We were in a very globalized world where we could just decide that we would get cheap supply chain.
Not a few decades, a few years actually.
A few years ago, you're right. Mm-hmm. Today, we have extremely expensive energy, 2 to 5 times depending on where, compared to the US and China. We have huge problems of supply chain because of the multipolar world we are in. And I can talk about my industry, so in energy technology. Every country where we actually sell technologies, every country is putting in place clear localization strategies. If you don't build and manufacture in the country, you have no right to play and to sell in the country. There's one region where it's not the case, it's Europe. And this is probably something where we need to adjust that and to be a bit less naive on this topic to make sure that we have a level playing field in keeping also our supply chain, not just for growing the industry and maintaining the industry in the continent, but actually also for sovereignty, for security in terms of supply chain. I take the PV example. It was invented in Europe, in Germany, by the way, by Siemens. few decades later, 80%, 90% of the PV industry, so solar industry, is now made in China. A few years ago, we were thinking of, and Europe was actually pushing on that, of reinstalling a PV supply chain, realizing how dangerous it was actually for the European sovereignty in terms of energy transition and energy sovereignty. And actually, France was very active on it. We discussed a lot also with the French government, the German government, on where to do that, and we wanted to participate. Literally, a few months later, the price of solar panels dropped by 40% by the Chinese. I mean, there was no more business model, and until there's no clear rules to be able to protect that, there's no way of rebuilding an industry and a supply chain in PV in Europe. But you see this for many other things. 60% of EV is now Chinese. 75% of critical materials, critical minerals, is Chinese. If you take the wind industry, almost 100% of the permanent magnets that you use are Chinese. So it's a huge problem of European sovereignty and European security to tackle that.
So Bruno, it's very smart what we just heard, but I have the impression it somehow must go against your liberal values, right? So what's your answer to that? Is regulation, is more regulation a solution?
Same liberal values, but I think that we cannot be the very last continent to abide by rules that are not applied by the others. Because, you know, in the theory of game, when you are the very last player to abide by the rules, you are the loser. So I'm not explaining that we have to get rid of the liberal rules. I'm just explaining that we have to define a very clear long-term strategy. Not thinking that the market will solve all the issue. I really think it is a mistake to think like that. Just 3 examples. The first one is energy. You need a long-term planification for energy. And I will be blunt, because I'm always blunt with my German friends. Germany will need nuclear energy. And I do not see any possibility for the German industry to remain the most powerful in Europe without the nuclear energy. Renewable will not be enough. And I want, of course, the German industry to be strong, because this is in the interest of all 27 member states. Second, you need to define what are the industries that you want to preserve, to protect and to develop. Of course, the automotive industry would be the first one, 14 million jobs. The aeronautic industry would be the second one. The biotech industry would be the third one, and the biotech industry could be jeopardized by the very last Trump's decision. Let's be aware of that. If we are not taking the right decisions, all the 27, to pay for drugs by changing the welfare state, all the biotech technologies will move away from Europe to the US. And we will not get access to the state-of-the-art drugs. The same for the chemical industry. The future of the chemical industry is at stake if we are not changing the norms and changing the access to decarbonized energy. And the third point, which is absolutely critical, and everybody must be aware of that, we have 1 to 3 years to engage in the building of a strong chips industry in Europe. We have all what is required to be successful. We have ASML in the Netherlands. I'm working for that company, by the way. You have Infineon in Germany and SAP. You have microelectronics in France and in Italy. You have the IMEC, the best world lab in Belgium. So let's pull together all those elements, all those assets, to get access to our own chips industry, not to be dependent on China and the US. Just a figure. 30 years ago, Europe was producing 40% of the chips in the world. Now we have a market share of less than 10%. We have to hurry up to build our own chips, not to be too dependent on China and the US.
Let's focus and elaborate a little bit on the first point you said, the energy part, because we have an expert here when it comes to that field. In your view, in rather simple terms, in light of times, what is the European energy landscape, the European energy system, how does it look like in probably and likely in the next 5 years, in your opinion?
So, I mean, the European energy landscape will continue to be extremely diversified because that's the way to keep it actually cheap. But we need much more renewables.
So diversity of the energy landscape is kind of an indicator of cheap energy?
It's a way to avoid over-investing in some types of energy and where you actually don't need to produce it all the time. So typically, diversity means you will have a lot of renewables, you will have nuclear, you will still have gas.
We will have nuclear in Germany as well. Do you agree to that?
The nice thing is that the energy systems are going to be more and more interconnected. So even if Germany does not have nuclear, it will benefit from the nuclear that comes from Poland, France, and elsewhere.
It's a wonderful way of avoiding a question. Thank you very much. But I interrupted you. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, but so today, if you look actually just after the invasion in Ukraine, for the first time, you had more electricity that was produced by renewables in Europe than by gas. Yeah, 40% of the electricity was produced by renewables. It shows that it's extremely resilient because it's not depending on any price spikes or things like that, and it's not imported. So it's actually very good cost-wise and autonomy-wise. So we're going to go more and more towards that. The big bottleneck is the grid. Today, you have 3,000 gigawatts, sorry, I'm talking about the gigawatts, sorry for that, 3,000 gigawatts in the world that are just waiting to be connected to the grid, that are actually projects of renewable projects that are there waiting because there's no grid connection. Half of it is in Europe. So this is a huge topic we need to work on to be able to improve and to invest in it. The energy investments, if you look at Europe, can be a huge growth engine. When we talk about energy investments, it's 2.5 trillion. It's in Europe 5% of GDP every year. That means 5 times the Marshall Plan in terms of creating jobs. Today, Europe, we were talking about how we lost a lot of chips, etc. Today, Europe is leading in clean tech. 20% of the clean tech is actually produced by European champions, European leaders. If we don't continue to invest in it in the years to come, it will also leave. So like it's something,
PV.
Sorry?
Like the PV.
Like PV, like EV, like a lot of technologies. So it is something where it can be a huge growth engine for the European economy, creating jobs, factories, manufacturing, and actually positioning ourselves as leaders. But there, today, same thing, we're already slow. It was something that we could say, where we could say, hey, we're actually the green champions, the energy transition champions in Europe. Today, China, last year, has produced more renewables alone than the whole rest of the world. And the US, despite what we're hearing with President Trump and all that, is actually the second biggest investor in renewables. Europe is only the third one. We're actually also losing pace.
Mr. Le Maire, let's briefly turn our attention to domestic politics. To do some kind of reality check,
sure?
And I don't want to torture you with the questions about the situation in France right now. But you've been present, very present actually, in the media in recent weeks, including German media as well. As I was preparing for this interview, I first read an article saying that you were to be appointed as France's new Minister of Defense. A couple of hours later, I checked the news again, and I saw no, not going to happen. The new French government collapsed even before it could be formed. In other words, my broader question, Mr. Le Maire, do we in Europe still have the national stability, so to say, to manage these kind of transformations? I think we agree that one needs some certain amount of stability in order to push transformations and to manage this very complex situation. Do we still have that, or are you afraid that we're going to lose that within the next year or 2 years once there is elections in France and once there might be new elections in Germany?
I think that the key issue is that we do not have the stability on the same time all together. If I would be had on that stage 5 years before, you would have said, well, you are the long-standing Minister of Economy and Finance, more than 7 years, it is unique. in France under the Fifth Republic. Now I'm here on stage and you can say, well, you just lasted 12 hours as the defense minister. That's a new record, but in the other sense. You had instability in Germany, now we have instability in France. You had instability in Italy, now you have stability in Italy. But you never have all the governments together being stable. That's a key weakness for Europe. My second remark would be that we are moving at the pace of a turtle when the world is moving at the pace of a rabbit. And this could lead to major disappointments. I just want to go back to the question of semiconductors. We have between 1 to 3 years to take the right decisions. Then it will be too late because the industry will need chips, state-of-the-art chips, or use chips of around 35 nanometers, and you will buy your chips in Taiwan or in China or in the US, and it will be the end of a very key industry. So I'm advocating for stability, but it's up to the people to decide. And this comes back to my first remark when I delivered my speech. We need to recognize our failures to improve our policies.
I know that we are already over time, but let's ignore that for a second because I want to ask you another question. Anne-Laure, Chammard, it's such a privilege speaking to you, both of you here. You're a woman in business, from business, of business. You have been, however, very precise. You have a very precise view of politics as well. You need to have, of course, in your job. How do you assess this issue? I mean, there is, in Germany, we often, Uli Wilhelm and I, we spoke about this quite a bit, actually, that entrepreneurs very often have the wrong perspective on politics, and there is a core value in politics as well, and you can't solve every problem in politics with an entrepreneurial approach. However, there is an entrepreneurial approach also to politics. What's your view of that? Do we have the stability to change our societies? Do we have the political stability, or don't we have?
So it's a very good point, and actually, industries invest when there's stability, when they have long-term signals, when they actually know that there's regulation that stay the course.
But they can rely on something.
Exactly.
Right?
This is when they invest. Yeah? And today's situation, we see it in our business. So many projects are stalling because of this uncertainty. If I take the example of France. Until recently, it was one of the countries in Europe where, honestly, you could say there's a true industrial policy, it stays the course, we know exactly what funding will be there, how it will be done, what is the vision, and what money will be put in this. For us, as a company, this was a very strong signal. And by the way, we did a joint venture with a French company, Air Liquide, to produce, to build a gigafactory here in Berlin of electrolyzers to be able to support that with German funding and having our first big projects in France with French funding. This is the way you can create European champions. This is the way, when you have the stability, you can create mega companies, Airbus, this JV that we're starting, which we really want to make as a champion, and which actually today, thanks to that, 1 out of every 3 hydrogen projects in the world has been won by this JV, by this Franco-German JV, and by far they're the number 1 in the world today. So there are successes that can happen, but it only happens if you have the right visibility, in terms of investment and vision and ambition. Second thing is harmonization. Today, each time we were talking about the grid being the bottleneck, today each time we go and approach a TSO, so a TSO is a grid utility, the grid builders, every country has 20,000 pages of different specs for things that are literally the same. This is 150 engineers working for 6 months to be able to respond to a project request when honestly we're talking about the same thing. How can you scale? How can you do that cheaply for the economy, for the European economy? You can't. So things like that need to be harmonized. And third thing for the European industry, we should stop being, 27 competitors. We should stop building 27 national little champions that can't compete against Chinese giants, US giants. So we should also change the competition rules change maybe merger controls to be able to create these big giants that are actually going to, compete against other continents. Yeah.
Before you have a third point?
No, go on.
It's my final question, so there won't be a third point then. You're sure?
There's one thing I'd like to talk about.
Please.
Data centers and AI. I mean, honestly, Bruno Le Maire was talking about it just before, but here too, I think we really need to move so much faster than what we do in Europe. I was recently in the US. I mean, for them, AI, and this is the way it's phrased, winning the race of AI is a matter of national security. And the Ministry of Energy in the US takes it extremely seriously. They say, my job is to generate enough power in the US to be able to build all this infrastructure, all these data centers, to be able to sustain this topic, which is national security. They're building data centers like we've never seen, and as a resilience mechanism. If you look today in the world, in the next 5 years, the amount of data centers that are going to be built, in order to be able to power them, it's like adding 200 nuclear plants in only 5 years. All this is happening in the US. In France, in Europe, we have 25% of the data that is produced in Europe. We only have 10% of the data centers. We're not investing enough, we're not going fast enough, and other countries are doing that. So this is also something where I think we should accelerate.
Before I ask you the final question, whether you see yourself within the next 5 years in politics, I would like to ask you whether you see her in politics within the next 5 years, Mr. Le Maire. What do you think?
Well, first of all, I 100% share what you just said about unity, speed, harmonization, and less competition, more coordination among member states. Just want to recall this anecdote. I mentioned it in my speech when I was in Shanghai 2 weeks ago. I had a discussion with the guy who is responsible for the Chinese nuclear program. And he asked me, how many nuclear plants will you be building in France? And my response was 8 by 2045. And I said to him, and you in China? 2 per year. So let's hurry up. Then about politics, I think that one of the response to the political crisis, maybe the single one, will come from you, from the citizen. I think that professionals won't be enough. We need the citizen to be part of the political discussion. We need the CEOs to take the floor. And these are critics I've always been formulating in France. We are waiting for the CEOs, for the leaders, for the economic leaders to take the floor, to explain the world as it stands, and to provide some solutions.
Thank you very much. So, since I do not get an answer, I will predict that in the next 5 years, Anne-Laure de Chammard will be in politics, and I thank you very much for being here on stage today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bruno Le Maire, Anne-Laure de Chammard.